See, all this education, and we'll see if I can actually sit. Right? Is anybody here for the first time? Oh, welcome. Welcome. That's very nice. So we're going to start with singing a hymn. Jai Radha Madhava. It's a hymn to Krishna, and it helps us to meditate on the loving exchanges between Krishna and his closest devotees, the gopis of Vrindavan. So if you don't know the words, you can listen. It's really pretty. Jai Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivaradari Jaya Gopi Jana Balabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivaradari Jaya Gopi Jana Balabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajikachara Shara Astachara Shara, His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. So I'd like to start by offering my obeisances to my spiritual teachers and to all the devotees. Om Agyana Timarandasya Gyanan Gyanan Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitamina Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Vanchal Kalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Brinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Thank you all for being here. We've moved up to Escondido, so I haven't been able to be here as often as I would like, and I have, family things that are going on. But every time I come, Krishna's still here. The deities are so beautiful, and I'm very grateful to the devotees who take care of this temple and take care of the devotees so nicely. It's comforting to know that this place is always here. This sacred space is always here. So tonight I wanted to talk about suffering. Okay, and that's something that wherever you go, whoever you're talking to, people can always relate to this topic, right? Who has not experienced suffering? Even a newborn baby is experiencing some suffering. And I guess it's kind of on my mind because my husband just had a knee replacement surgery. So, and I didn't realize what a big deal this was because it's a routine surgery, but it's not an easy surgery. So I left him at home moaning in pain, and I will leave after this and go back and watch him moan in pain because there's not really much anybody can do. But, he's suffering. And our weather, the past couple of years, worldwide weather, right? Hurricanes, fires. I don't know if earthquake is a weather, but, all of these things go on. And it's amazing, like looking at the news photography of the effect of the hurricane that just happened in Florida. And you can see, like, whole blocks are just, they were filled with houses and stores and whatever, and now they're just empty, right? And all these people who, even maybe they didn't survive, or maybe their family members didn't survive, but if they survived, their house is gone, their job is gone, so how is it that this is always going on? And this was a question that my mother used to ask, is, why does God allow this suffering, right? What is he? Vindictive, do we make him angry, And that's, there are religious philosophies based on the fact that we've made God angry and we need to atone. But it's a paradox that people wrestle with, right? That if God is all-powerful and if God is good, then how come evil exists in the world? How come these things happen that nobody wants to happen, right? Nobody wants to suffer. We're all doing our darndest to avoid suffering, right? And yet it comes. So what's the deal, God? What's the story? Nietzsche, I found this quotation this morning and I really like it. Nietzsche, who was not particularly religious, said, "To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering." Okay? So not just every person, but everything that lives undergoes some suffering. But maybe we can find some meaning in the suffering. All right? So we have that dilemma, God's good, but, I'm suffering, what's the deal? Well, just a little reflection. We can find some examples in our own lives of where we're doing good for somebody, but it's causing them some discomfort in the here and now, right? As a parent, that's just part of the deal. That's what you do. And I remember when my daughter was a toddler and we took her to get some immunizations, right, vaccinations. And, of course, we didn't tell her, hey, this is going to hurt a lot, So she was surprised when it hurt. And she walked out to her dad with like the most bewildered, sad, and accusing eyes and said, Daddy, I got shotted, And it was like this, you're the one who's supposed to protect me, but you brought me here where these people stick needles into me. What is going on, Dad? And we do that, whether vaccinations are a thing or not, I don't know. But when parents do that, they're doing it because they want to benefit their child. They want to protect their child. So there's some pain now, and we hope that there's some protection later. Well, similarly, that's what God is doing, right? There's a purpose behind this suffering. It's not arbitrary. It's not meaningless. It has to do with the nature of the universe and our place in it. So one thing that people generally are aware of is the law of karma, right? Anybody not ever hear of karma before? Okay, so as you sow, so shall you reap. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If you do good things, then good things are going to happen. If you do bad things are going to happen. But you know what? It's not always that clear cut, right? There have been whole books, whole TED Talks on why do bad things happen to good people, right? Because we all know people who are doing bad things, but everything just seems to go smoothly for them in terms of their material life. And in the opposite, we know people who are, completely kind and loving and never hurt anybody, and yet they go through hardship. So we understand, in the Vaishnava philosophy, we understand that we've lived previous lives, right? So some of the things that are happening to us right now are a result of things we've done in previous lives. Okay, fair. I have trouble with that as a teaching tool, though, right? How can I learn if I'm being punished for something I don't remember doing, right? What exactly is the lesson here? Okay, and even on a mundane level, our Supreme Court wrestles with this. Can you execute somebody if they don't remember doing the crime for which you're going to execute them? How is that fair? How is that just? So I don't think that the Lord is less just than our Supreme Court. I find that, I know that's not true. So there's a deeper lesson going on. It's not just that we're supposed to learn, don't do bad things, do lots of good things. Okay, that's a good lesson. We should learn that lesson, but that's not the only lesson there is. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are, in various places, more information about how this world works and why there is so much suffering. And one of the places where it's nicely laid out is in the 3rd canto, where Lord Kapila Dev is talking to his mother, Devahuti. And Kapila Dev is a partial incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Bhagawan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, he has 6 opulences: knowledge, strength, renunciation, fame, beauty, wealth. Did I say wealth? Okay, and wealth. Okay, and in Kapila Dev, he manifests the opulence of knowledge in full. Okay, so Krishna has all 6 opulences. Kapila Dev has knowledge. He is like the incarnation of knowledge. So he gives spiritual knowledge to his mother, and in this dialogue between the two of them, obviously the rest of us get to share in that knowledge. And he explains that this material world exists because it's one of Krishna's pastimes. It's one of God's pastimes. God exists. Krishna exists as the original person. And then, in order to exchange love, there have to be at least 2, right? You can't exchange love between yourself, right? You got to have someone to have an exchange with. So he expands himself. And he expands himself in many forms, both what we call Vishnu Tattva, or, aspects of God, and Jiva Tattva, which is us, the little spirit soul, the servant of Krishna. So in the spiritual world, all the little jivas, all the little souls are serving Krishna. And they're experiencing the bliss of this love in serving Krishna. But every now and then, one of us thinks, I wonder what it's like to be in the other role, on the other end, receiving the service. That can't happen in the spiritual world. Right? In the spiritual world, Krishna's identity is fully manifest. You can't think that you're God because it's so obvious that Krishna's God. So out of love, Krishna gives us this material realm in which we can see what it would be like to try to be the center. All right? The material world is set up so that there are, according to the Vedas, 25 elements. All right, there are 10 elements that Krishna manifests that are like the environment, the I don't know what to call it, but air, earth, fire, water, and ether, and then taste, sight, sound, smell, and touch. Okay, and that makes up the physical. And then there are 10 more that make up our bodies. Right, we have a sense of taste, a sense of touch, etc. We also have mind, intelligence, false ego, and contaminated consciousness, okay? Because the soul in its pure state is eternally knowledgeable and eternally blissful, okay? So if we're suffering, obviously we're not in our pure state. Somehow we have been affected by being in this environment, this material environment. We wanted to forget Krishna so that we could try to be the central enjoyer. Krishna's given us that facility. But that means our consciousness is contaminated. Now, these 24 elements make up this realm that Krishna's given us to try to enjoy separately from him. But here's the kicker. There's a 25th element. And the 25th element is time. All right? And what that means is everything's always changing. Right? The time factor means that nothing stays forever. There's a saying that my grandmother used to quote, "This too shall pass," right? And it's very useful in situations when you're suffering. You tell yourself, this too shall pass. But it's also true in situations where you're enjoying, right? This too shall pass. So there's an inherent anxiety and sense of loss in the material world because whatever we are enjoying, whatever we want to hold on to, we know is going to end. Okay? So the material world is not set up for us to become perfectly happy. Why is this? Because Krishna doesn't want us to stay here. All right? All of this suffering has, as part of its purpose, the impetus to push us to say, what the heck is going on? Why is this world the way it is? Why am I suffering? What can I do about it? Okay? And Prabhupada says, this is the beginning of human life when you start asking these questions. Up until the point where we start asking these questions, we're just kind of floating along. We're just being carried by the three modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. We're just going along. Our senses are pulling us this way. Thoughts go this way. And who knows where we're going to end up. But when we start asking, who am I? Why am I suffering? And how can I stop suffering? That's when we start to become awakened. All right? Our human life begins. In order for us to, I'm going to make a side comment. Philosophy, there's a lot of philosophy in the Bhagavad Gita, and there's a lot of philosophy in the Bhagavatam, and I recommend that you read them. Okay, if you haven't read anything, start with the Gita. But there's a lot of information there that helps us to develop a way of seeing the world that promotes spiritual consciousness. All right. However, philosophy alone is not enough. All right. Love for God, that's our goal. All right. Our goal is that we want to reconnect with Krishna. We want to, again, become the loving servants of Krishna. That doesn't come from knowledge or philosophy. All right? Bhakti, that loving devotion, is causeless. So that comes by mercy. That comes by Krishna's grace. All right? But we can create an environment that favors the development of bhakti. And that's where purifying our consciousness by chanting the holy names, by reading the scriptures, by seeing our life through the lens of scripture, that's where those things come in. All right? So in order to see our suffering through the lens of Krishna, we need to know why we're suffering. Okay? And Kapila Dev says we're suffering because we're attached. All right? Because we have material desires. It's the nature of the soul to desire. It's the nature of the soul to act. All right? And that's one of the reasons why some philosophies say, okay, well, you know, attachment causes suffering, so let's just become unattached. But how do you do that? How do you stop wanting things? How do you stop your desires? Right? I don't know the answer to that. Okay? I don't know how to become someone with no desires. Okay? I understand I can spiritualize my desires. Okay? But there's always going to be desire. It's the nature of the soul. So Kapila Dev says what we want to do is we want to shift our attachment, right? I'm attached to my own ego. I'm attached to sense gratification. I'm attached to chocolate cake, or chocolate anything, really. You know, all of these attachments, right? All that chocolate cake makes me get fat, and then I feel depressed because I'm fat, you know, and it's like action and reaction, right? But if I can shift my attachments from these material things to spiritual things, that's where real happiness lies. Okay? And Kapila Dev says one of the first things we need to do in that connection is to shift our attachment to Krishna's devotees. All right? We can't approach Krishna directly. Right? One has to be very pure. One has to be without false ego, without any separate desire other than to serve Krishna in order to approach the Lord. When I was a younger person, before I met the Vaishnava devotees, I really wanted to have a relationship with God. You know, I grew up in a family that didn't really practice religion, and I really wanted to have a relationship with God, but I knew I wasn't qualified, and I had no idea how to get qualified. You know, it was like this horrible dilemma, like how do I approach you when I can see, you know, these very, very deep spiritual deficits in my heart, you know, and I don't know how to fix them, right? And so one of the things we learn is that we don't have to fix those desires, right? Because we can approach Krishna through his devotees. And the devotees of the Lord are more merciful than the Lord in that sense, that they will help us to become purified enough to return to the spiritual world. So when we see our suffering through this lens, when we understand that the suffering's built into this world because it's not our home, we're not supposed to stay here, and we're actually supposed to be looking for a way out. And when we understand that by attaching ourselves to others who can serve the Lord, who can teach us to serve the Lord, then we can start to make use of these suffering times. Okay? I'll share one example from the scripture of how this cruel to be kind kind of phenomenon can work. And I'm sure we've all experienced it in our own lives, but I like the story, so I'm going to tell it. Indra is called the king of heaven. All right, so Indra's the king of the demigods, and he rules the heavenly planets, very powerful and a devotee of the Lord. But he's also very proud, and he tends to offend people from time to time. And at one point, he offended his spiritual master, Brihaspati. And so Brihaspati said, look, you know, you're behaving so badly, you can just become a hog. You can go down to earth and just become a hog. You know, let's see if that'll straighten you out. Well, the material energy is so encompassing that Indra goes to earth and becomes the king of the hogs, right? And now he's got a hog wife, and he's got hog kids, and he's got these hogs he's ruling over. And he's actually quite happy, okay? So after some time passes, Brihaspati says, well, maybe we should get Indra back. He's been on timeout long enough. And so he sends Narada Muni to tell Indra, okay, you can come back. But by this time, Indra's like totally identified with being a hog. So he's like, nah, I can't go. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I got this wife, I got these kids, I got all these responsibilities. No heavenly planets for me. I'm going to stay right here and be a hog. So Narada Muni kills Indra's wife and kids and all the hogs. Problem solved, right? So on the one hand, it's kind of like, wow, maybe I don't want that much mercy, right? Please don't take everything I love away like that. Okay, Lord? But at the same time, it was mercy. Okay? Here's Indra, right, thinking I'm the king of the hogs. I'm enjoying like anything here in this, muddy whatever, Hogs are not known for being in the most pleasant environments. Okay? When his identity on another level is he's the king of heaven. So I don't know what your idea of heaven is, but, dancing girls, soft beds, wonderful entertainment, opulent food, I don't know. But, it's there. And this is what he could be having. And he's saying, no, I'll stay here with the hogs. So, the mercy is, let me cause a calamity to wake you up, to shake you out. And that's what suffering is doing for us if we take it in the right way. We can't overcome these material attachments by ourselves because the material attachments are rooted in Krishna's energy. This material energy that influences our consciousness is Krishna's energy. And Krishna himself says, this divine energy of mine is difficult to overcome. But if you take shelter of me, then you can easily cross beyond it. So in order to overcome this material energy, we have to have the proper understanding of what we're doing, and we have to take shelter of the devotees. So that brings us to the question of how does a devotee, how does somebody who's seriously trying to develop their relationship with God, how did they respond to suffering, right? I know how my default reaction to suffering is to have a fit, right? It's not fair. Why is this happening to me? Who can I blame, right? That's what spouses are good for, right? If you get married, you always have somebody to blame things on. I think it's in the vows, right? Love, honor, obey, and always accept the blame for everything, So, but that doesn't really solve anything, okay? So how do we see it? Well, the highest level, the transcendental person accepts the suffering with gratitude, okay? Because they can understand the purpose is actually to wake me up. The purpose is to move me closer to you, Lord, and anything that moves me closer to you, I'm all for it, right? And that's the level of Queen Kunti. In the Mahabharata, it's the saga, I guess is the word I'm going to use, the saga of a fratricidal war between the Kurus and the Pandavas, the side that is surrendered to Krishna and the side that wants to do their own thing and doesn't want to follow Krishna's instructions. Summary. One of the personalities in this saga is Queen Kunti, who is the mother of the 5 Pandava heroes, but also a very advanced personality, a very advanced spiritual personality. So after the big battle of Kurukshetra, where like millions and millions of people have been killed, and the side that was surrendered to Krishna is victorious, and right, we're all going to live happily ever after. Krishna is leaving and going back to his kingdom of Dwarka, and Kunti is saying goodbye to him. And she says, among many other eloquent things, she says, you've saved us from so many calamities. You've saved us from being poisoned, from, people wanted to burn our house down with us in it. People were attacking us all the time. We were in this horrible battle, and after the battle, somebody unleashed a nuclear mantra on us, and, you protected us from all of these things. I wish these things could happen again and again, because then I would see you. And when I see you, I know that I am being saved from the worst calamity, which is repeated birth and death in this material world. All right? Very few of us are on a platform where we can pray, Lord, please send me really traumatic calamities because that will help me remember you. Right? And we don't want to artificially pray that way. But we can understand that that's in reality what's happening. Okay? In reality, the Lord is giving us so many opportunities to come closer to Him and to take shelter of Him. There's another personality from the Christian tradition that has always kind of stayed in my heart. Her name was Corrie ten Boom, and she was in a Nazi concentration camp in World War II, obviously. She and her family were rescuing Jews. I think they were in the Netherlands. It's one of those Northern European countries. And so they were hiding Jews and helping them get out of the Nazi-controlled areas. Hundreds of people they saved. But eventually, of course, they were caught. And, you know, the entire family went to the concentration camp. And she and her sister were in the same camp. Her sister died. You know, she went through all of the things that, you know, they did in concentration camps. They were starved, they were tortured, they were doing forced labor, you know, disease, everything, right? And she was known in that camp for being so cheerful and so positive. And many people around her converted to Christianity simply because of her example in that camp. After the war, she then went around preaching forgiveness, even extending to forgiving the Nazis who had imprisoned her. All right, so she's a very, very saintly person. But she said one thing that stuck with me. She said, "You will never learn that Christ is all you need until Christ is all you have." All right? So in other words, when we're in those desperate situations, that's when we can really go deep into our spiritual connection. All right? And it's not easy. I'm not going to say it's easy, and I'm not going to say I can do it. All right? But what I found is if you practice on little suffering, like the little inconveniences and the little traumas, and say, okay, Lord, you know, I'm going to take shelter of you here, then it's easier on the bigger ones. All right? We have time for me to talk about a different example of this same phenomenon, and one that I find more relatable, I guess, and that's Dhruva Maharaj. Okay? So Dhruva's the son of a king. The king has 2 wives. He doesn't like Dhruva's mother as well as he likes the mother of his other son. All right? So Dhruva's kind of like the not favored child, the red-headed stepchild, as they say. I can relate to that. I felt that way growing up. Like, you know, it was all about my brother. It was never about me. Right? So at one point, Dhruva comes into the throne room, sees his brother sitting on his father's lap, and he thinks, yeah, I'd like to sit there too. But, you know, his mother's co-wife says, only my son sits on the king's lap. If you want to sit on the king's lap, you have to die and take birth again as my son. All right? Not real nice. Okay? And Dhruva, being a passionate warrior type of child, he's 5 years old, right? He cannot tolerate this. You know, he just loses it. And again, I can relate. And he goes to his mother and says, you know, I'm heartbroken. What do I do? My father doesn't love me. You know, what do I do? And his mother says, look, I can't solve this problem for you. I also feel neglected by your father. I don't know what to tell you. But I do know who can solve your problem, and that's the Supreme Lord. So if you take shelter of the Supreme Lord, then your problem will be solved. Right? And Dhruva, you know, very determined child, he decides to go to the forest and meditate and, you know, develop his relationship with the Supreme Lord. Now, not because he's a saintly child, you know. There are other examples of saintly children in the scriptures, and quite frankly, I, you know, can't relate. But Dhruva I get. You know, he wanted something. Somebody told him this is the way to get it, and he's like, darn it, I'm going to get it, right? But the Lord's so merciful that even with that motive, right, enlightenment is available to him. Transcendence is available to him. So he goes out into the forest and is fortunate enough to meet a spiritual teacher, Narada Muni. And Narada Muni's first instruction is, look, you're 5 years old, this is a forest, what are you doing here? Go home, right? You're too young. You can do this later, right? And Dhruva doesn't follow that instruction. You know, he says, I'm sorry, I know that's good advice, I just can't do it, right? I cannot swallow the insults from my family, and I got to get relief. And again, I find that very relatable, right? You know, how many times do we get good advice and we think, yeah, I know that's what I should do, but just can't do it, right? But because he's actually seeking to take shelter of the Lord, even in spite of this, he's going to get the benefit. So he learns how to meditate in such a way that he will awaken his own God consciousness within him. He will become aware of the Lord within his heart. And as he's meditating, God appears. Krishna appears. And by this mercy, by this benediction of getting the spiritual instruction from the right teacher, putting it into practice, and having the face-to-face darshan, or meeting with the Lord, he realizes, okay, wait a minute, I came out here because I wanted a kingdom greater than my father's so that I could show my father and my stepmother and my brother that, you know, I beat them all, right? But now that I actually have gotten to this spiritual point, I realize that's pretty useless. And the way he puts it is, you know, I asked for a piece of glass, you know, and I realized like there's a diamond. And what he wants from that point, he wants to further his relationship with the Lord. He just wants to serve the Lord. All right? So again, he's in distress. He turns to the Lord, even though he can't execute the instructions of the saintly person perfectly, right? He's not completely obedient. But by taking shelter of the Lord, by taking the instructions of the saintly person, he actually comes face to face with God. Right? So that's how to approach adversity, right? Is we can bring everything in our hearts to God. I guess that's the point that I see in Dhruva Maharaj. It's not just that we can only pray for spiritual things. We can only pray, you know, on the highest spiritual plane. I'm going to pray Queen Kunti's prayer, please give me more calamities so I can remember you, or I'm not going to pray at all. No. You know, like Dhruva, we can bring the things in our heart to Krishna. And by taking shelter of Krishna with those things, we will make advancement. Okay? It doesn't mean that Krishna is going to give us everything we ask for any more than a parent gives a child everything they ask for. But by bringing those things to Krishna, by deepening that relationship, we will benefit. Okay. And there were a couple other examples of how devotees handle adversity that I wanted to touch on. One is to handle adversity through forgiveness, you know, and this is a challenging thing to do, all right? But we see it, for example, in the life of Jesus Christ, right? People are torturing him to death, basically, is what they're doing. And he says, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do, right? In other words, they're not really responsible. And that ability, I mean, aside from the fact that he was a pure devotee, but that ability to forgive others can be fostered by this understanding of philosophy. Okay, so why did he say they know not what they do? Anybody have a theory? Okay, because they knew they were torturing him to death. That was their intention, right? He had been sentenced to death. They knew that, you know, what they were doing was going to end in his death. And they knew that he was suffering, and they were actually doing things to increase his suffering. So what was it that they didn't know? How is it that they're not responsible? And, you know, now I'm going to mix philosophies, because I can only answer that question as a Vaishnava. I don't know the answer from a Christian point of view. But as a Vaishnava, we understand that everybody's conditioned by the material nature. And unless somebody is becoming conscious, they're not really in control of their choices. They're being affected by the modes of material nature. They're being dragged here and there by their own senses. And so, you know, while they are making choices, they're not 100% in charge of their choices, right? Until we become conscious, we don't really know what we're doing. We don't really understand the effect that we're having on other people or the meaning of our own actions. All right? So by being able to look at these people and say, and Haridas Thakur was the same thing, you know, they tried to execute him by beating him, caning him in 22 different marketplaces. And he was also similarly forgiving, right? Because he understood what happens to me is a result of forces beyond just the person who's acting. In other words, Krishna says, you have the right to perform your prescribed duties, but not to the fruits of your action, right? You can do something, but you're not in control of the results, right? I mean, how many times have we tried to do something that turned out exactly the opposite of what we wanted to do, right? So similarly, when people are trying to hurt us, right? Okay, they have that intention, they want to hurt us, right? But the outcome was not in their control, all right? So if I ended up with an outcome I didn't like, somehow there's a bigger reason, okay? Is it my karma? Is it the Lord saying, look, you know, I'm going to give you this great opportunity to become more God conscious, you know, to which I sometimes say, no, thank you, not right now. You know, but there's more going on. So to say, you did this to me is not entirely accurate, right? In a sense, I did this to me. In another sense, Krishna's doing this to me. So by having that understanding, we can be more forgiving. Okay. And then the last example I wanted to talk about was suffering in the service of Krishna, right? There's always going to be difficulties, and my instinct, you know, my default instinct is if there's difficulties, I'd rather do something else. You know, when it gets hard, I'm the one who's like, okay, you know, I don't want to do that anyway. But that's not the attitude we bring to devotional service. Right? When we're serving the Lord and something's hard, we got to keep going. Or if you're a parent, you know, you can't say, "Oh, I'm tired of this baby. I'm not getting up tonight." You know, so we, as grown-ups, we have to learn this. But as spiritualists, we have to learn it even more. And the person that comes to my mind as a great example of this is Srila Prabhupada, the founder of our movement. 70 years old, he leaves India and comes to America. Okay, and just that alone was a huge austerity, huge suffering. Then he had 2 heart attacks on the way, all right? Then when he got here, he didn't know anybody, right? So he's here in the U.S. He has like 7 rupees that he can't even spend, right? And some copies of some books that he's translated, books on spiritual knowledge that no one in the U.S. at that time had ever heard of. And the name of the son of a friend, okay? And he went through so many different austerities, so many different types of suffering, from being disrespected by the people he's trying to help, to, you know, being attacked by crazy people, and just, you know, I mean, I could go on and on. And then building up this this movement, having disciples that were more trouble than a house full of teenagers, and just so many things. But because he was serving Krishna, and because he wanted so much for us to experience Krishna's love, all of this suffering, he was able to put in perspective, instead of being like, me personally, again, when I'm suffering, I take it real personally. Why are you doing this to me? Why is this happening to me? Et cetera. And because he had that perspective, that this is for Krishna, and, suffering just comes with it, roll with the punches, he was sticking with it, and he was continuing to give that mercy even when it wasn't always appreciated. So in conclusion, I'm not a fan of suffering, but it comes, comes with life. And if we understand why we're suffering, then we can use that suffering in a positive and a manner in which is going to help us grow spiritually. Okay, so, thank you very much. And are there any questions or comments? I've done it again. I've talked everybody into a stupor. Chatur Prabhu. Yeah, if you're new, the Bhagavad Gita is sort of the fundamental text, heavy on the philosophy. It's a conversation between a warrior and God on a battlefield. And the warrior's asking, who am I and why am I here? And Krishna's answering. There are also many other books. I also mentioned the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a multi-volume spiritual history of the universe. All right, so it's got a lot of different stories in it, a lot of different pastimes, a lot of philosophy, but a lot of narrative. And for those of us who are not philosophically inclined, I remember narrative better than I remember philosophy. So I also find that helpful and recommend it. Yes?
I just wanted to mention I was born and raised in the Harekrishna movement. I've been out of it for a little while.
Mm-hmm. Devahuti.
My mother is Mother Manindra. And
Uh-huh.
it's just absolutely wonderful to be back on the temple grounds.
Oh,
No matter which temple I'm in, it's absolutely
yeah.
purity. And thank you for your lecture.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you're here. Yeah. Hare Krishna. All right. Well, thank you all for your attention, and Hare Krishna.